Hey, welcome to Bums in the Bleacher podcast. I am your co-host, Drammy Sosa, aka the Dram Daddy, alongside my partner in crime, Brazzmaster. What's going on, Mike?
I'm doing well, John. Good to be back here for another episode of this, and one that we're at a pivotal point in the season. We declared the Cubs season pretty much over last time we recorded with our guy Bernsey. Cubs we thought would make it a little more official today, but overall some good moves made. I think that we're a little bit more regretting the moves that maybe didn't get made over what did get made, but some good moves made in terms of building up the team, for 2025 and beyond, I think.
Yeah, obviously you're prefacing the trade deadline coming and going today. So, over the last couple of years, the Major League Baseball has moved the trade deadline, to this date, and really, I know we were talking about in the last episode to really kind of try to avoid the goodbye watch, like the basically watching the dugouts and watching all that. And we still saw it anyways. We saw it with Christopher Morel getting traded in the third inning of, yep.
Or went out for Whiskers, exactly.
Yeah, goodbye Whiskers, Whiskers Morel. But, come and gone. There's been some trades that I think, when we talked about the trade deadline, Jed was very careful about talking about, being buyers or sellers, really was non-committal to either side, and really even kind of dipped his toe into saying, like, if they were going to make moves, the intention was to think through 2025 and beyond as well. So, the moves that Jed was looking at was really to impact the ball club beyond just this year, without just selling to sell. And wow, just like that, it is 2-0 Reds. Here at the bottom of the first, Justin Steele just gave up an RBI single.
Well, they might as well be playing like they sold if, that's what we actually really wanted them to do.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, I get it. Like, I think Jed was feeling the pressure from, fandom in some ways, where I think a lot of fans were just ready to just throw up arms if they were going to be full on sellers like they were back in 2021, which was like the big fire sale that the Cubs had. And they traded, Javi Baez, Chris Bryant, Anthony Rizzo. But like I said, the deadline's come and gone. They've made 3 moves, one being they traded for Isaac Paredes, the third baseman who has some versatility, replacing Christopher Morel, and also trading 2 prospects in that trade as well to the Tampa Bay Rays. And then we saw Nathan Pearson, right? Is it Nate Pearson? Yeah, Nate Pearson coming over from Toronto in a trade for some prospects, and then Mark Leiter Jr. Got traded today as well too. Earlier in the day before the deadline for 2 of the Yankees' top 30 prospects. One was infielder, and then we got a relief pitcher as well too, right?
Yes, shortstop Benjamin Cowles, product of the University of Maryland, was actually teammates with former Cubs first round. Well, I shouldn't say former, but recent Cubs first round draft pick Matt Shaw at Maryland. They were together in 2021. And then right-handed pitcher Jack Neely, who's currently AAA, was with AAA in the Yankees farm system, probably going to be the first guy among the prospects that they acquired that you'll see at the big league level. So, I feel that, like, they maybe didn't get the right asking price for guys like Tyon or Horner or anything like that, but I do like the willingness to take a risk and move off of someone like Christopher Morel, as sad as we are to see him go with, how much we market him here. But it feels like they made an upgrade defensively and at the plate at third base. In Isaac Paredes. There you go, Baloney. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly for you, as you mentioned on Twitter. It feels like they are doing as much as they can or they did as much as they can to try to acquire players that, like Jed had said in last week's scrum with the media, that they want to build towards 2025 and beyond. And feels pretty good about the players that they did acquire,
Yeah, I think, like, so we'll start with the Morel trade, because I think Christopher Morel was a he was a fan favorite for sure, right? And let's call it for what it is. I think we were a lot of the Cubs fans really kind of portrayed, Morel as like the second coming of Javi Baez in a lot of ways because they had that same kind of passion and excitement for the game, great in the clubhouse, just excitable players, right? Just easy to fall in love with because you could see how much they love the game. In the same breath, let's not get carried away. The guy was hitting under 200, and whether some of that, like if you look at the peripherals or the optics, maybe the hard hit rate was really high and he was hitting into some bad luck and things like that. But I think throughout the year, we were witnessing a player that when he got fastballs in his zone, he would absolutely demolish. When he was not, he wasn't hitting home runs. And again, the hard hit rate was, pretty solid, but he still wasn't connecting and hitting bombs. And then the other side of that was just defensively, the third base experiment just did not work, right? I mean, there were some plays that he made here and there that he made it look like, wow, maybe there's some potential. But overall, I mean, and I'll pull it up here in a second, but looking at like the defensive run save, he was one of the worst in baseball. So, we got the Cubs got a, third baseman and Isaac Paredes, who's, oddly enough, was a Cubs prospect, and they were really high on him when they signed him in the amateur draft. And has some versatility, can play first base, can play some second, can play short in a pinch. Obviously better defensively, upgrade there. And I think we were talking over the weekend, like I think this year currently about a 3-something WAR, and Christopher Morel was rating as a negative 0.1 WAR. So that's a 3 win above replacement right there, right?
Yes, I got distracted because he was just at the plate right now and actually made solid contact, but hit into and out. Yeah, Paredes for the season, 2.5 WAR, was an all-star for the Rays too. As you mentioned, former Cub farmhand that went over to Detroit in the Justin Wilson and Alex Avila trade in 2017, one that I know you're a big fan of. Not really, but one that a player that kind of the Rays just have a knack for getting the most out of young players that a lot of teams give up on sometimes. And Paredes was one of them between, this past season and this season, like really had come into his all as a hitter. I had seen a lot of people posting like his spray charts on Twitter that saying that like, some of the balls that he hit out for home runs in Tropicana Field may not go out at Wrigley. I think that is somewhat of a concern, but it's also worth noting that like, those same balls are more than likely pretty well hard hit, could go for extra bases, and could also, oh, nice. There we go.
Got a double from Dansby.
Are we sure that was a double or was that a home run? That looked like it hit off the top of the little box there in center field.
It did look like it was out. I wonder if they're going to take a look at it, but it's interesting, I did see that too, like the stats, when they were looking at like some of the StatCast stuff too. And I think the other thing that was mentioned too is that Isaac hasn't had a opposite field home run out of the 69 career home runs that he's had. So he is definitely a pull hitter. The one thing I will say though that I do like is that he doesn't strike out a lot. So it hit the top of the wall and came back. So that's probably
did it hit that little dark green streak?
It's going to be a double. Yeah, it's going to be a double.
More than likely from the angles we've seen.
Yeah. Looks like it's so.
I mean, the other factor in this too, and, this is one other thing that he never had to deal with in Tampa was, coming to Wrigley Field. We know how much of a hitter's park it can be when the wind is blowing out, which you don't get any sort of wind factor in Tropicana. So, you have a 25-year-old third baseman who's already been an all-star, seemingly has plenty of room to grow. I feel like this, similar to them getting Jeimer Candelario last year at the trade deadline, another former Cubs prospect that Jed had reacquired. Maybe Jed sometimes sees something in these guys that, that Theo originally didn't at the time that he traded them away. So, I mean, we'll see how it goes with him. I'm encouraged by this trade. Under control through the 2027 season.
Yep. 2 arb years.
2 arb years. Yep. Has each of the last 3 years been worth at least 2.5 wins above replacement. So, I do wonder just a bit that, like, if you're Matt Shaw in Tennessee right now, how are you feeling knowing that, the Cubs just went out and acquired a third baseman who mainly plays at third base and drafted 2 different guys who played third base with their first 2 picks in this previous draft? Probably thinking to yourself, okay, like, what new position are they going to shift me over to? Or am I going to be on the road am I going to be on the move for, an off-season trade or something like that?
Or I almost wonder if you feel like if they think that highly of Shaw and he continues to hit at, the AA, AAA levels, if they think that Nico is expendable in the offseason,
right?
At that point, maybe they're trying to cut some salary, in the offseason, because we did hear Nico's name come up a few times, in these the trade deadline talks, and nothing ever came to fruition, but it did get mentioned, a few that he could be somebody that's up for the right price. So maybe they look to move him in the offseason. That creates some space for Matt Shaw, who obviously is showing more power than Nico has and probably ever will, because, he's just a, solid contact hitter. That's what he is, right? He's just not a power guy. So I think you'd like to get more power out of second base if you can. And I think Matt Shaw provides that, but I don't think Matt Shaw is necessarily worried about it just yet. I think he's got to prove himself in AAA, and then I think it'll take care of itself. And I think Nico ends up becoming expendable at that point.
For sure. And I mean, to go back to like a previous Cubs era, like this was a little bit of a thing that people had a concern for when they had all the shortstop prospects in Javier Baez and Addison Russell and Gleyber Torres, and all the while Starlin Castro was still in the majors and like still seemed like the guy they were building around. And, come happen a few years later that Javier Baez is the only guy left standing there. So, in baseball, things kind of have a funny way of working themselves out like that.
Yeah. And they still got Cam Smith that plays third base too, that they just drafted this year coming out of college. So you would think that his trajectory is probably a little bit shorter getting to the big leagues than, somebody who's drafted out of high school, obviously. So it'll be interesting to see how they shift this infield in the coming years. The only mainstay that we know that is going to be there is Dansby Swanson, because you're not moving that contract at all. But I like the trade. I don't know how you felt about it. I think we both, when we talked about it, I think we both were kind of in agreement that it felt like a pretty good trade. Like it kind of stinks giving up a couple prospects along with Morel, but
on the surface, I'm definitely in favor of it. You're upgrading at an important position in third base. It is unfortunate to see a fan favorite in Morel go. And the one thing that does worry about me is, I mentioned it when we were talking about Paredes when he was on the Rays. The Rays have a knack for finding, the full potential in these young guys who didn't exactly find their full potential where they originally made their major league debut. And if there's any one team that can find Christopher Morel's full potential, it's probably going to be the Rays. So we'll see. Yeah. We'll be proven once and for all within the next year or so on what kind of player Christopher Morel is.
And quite honestly, even if they do figure it out, they're going to end up trading him in a Randy Arozarena type trade in 2 years. So it doesn't really, you know what I mean? It's like, even if they do unlock that potential, what is it good for if they're just going to flip them in the next couple of years? And I think they just passed the bill to start their next stadium. So I think money for them is going to become even more tight than it is right now. So some of these moves, or, he's got I think Morel has 2 years left, 2 arb years left as well. So, I mean, he's going to be due up for contract after that. So will he even, will it even like play out that he's going to be a Tampa Ray long enough for you to make that decision that, is an absolute, garbage trade. So, and I did look it up. So I didn't get the defensive run saved, but I will say that defensively, Christopher Morel is a minus 10.2 WAR defensively this year.
Oof. Yikes. Was that on Fangraphs? Like the
Fangraphs,
defensive
yep.
stat they have there?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
It's a pretty rough,
Yeah.
but
Was it pretty, you know,
yeah, and the other
but
trade that that happened, we talked about Nate Pearson coming over. That seemed like obviously one of Jed's vintage reclamation projects where you're buying low on a guy that just also didn't pan out in his drafted ball club. He was a first round pick for the Blue Jays. One of their top prospects that had high hopes, didn't pan out. Guy throws about 97, 98 miles per hour, has a wipeout slider, great strikeout percentage, doesn't walk a lot of guys, it seems like, but gives up the home run ball. So pretty, he's got a 5.5 ERA for his career. So it's going to be interesting to see what they see in him, if they can throw him in their pitch lab and see what they can get out of him. But we know that the Cubs don't spend money on the bullpen, that they try to find their bullpen arms this way. So closer of the future, maybe.
closer by default, more likely, but that's a good way of looking at it. But I mean, look, another pitcher that they traded away today was Mark Leiter Jr., who they kind of acquired in similar fashion, that had become a useful piece for them. And, Nate Pearson is a guy that could potentially, he has all the potential in the world. He wasn't a first round pick by mistake. He's not the first player to not have it really work out for them in Toronto, because, they're talking about trading Vlad Jr. now. Jesus.
For nothing.
9 hitter. Jesus, yep. Justin.
Yeah.
Man. Well, whatever. The Reds are kind of the one team that owns him a lot. I'm surprised Tyler Stevenson hasn't gone deep yet, because I know he's got like 500 career batting average against Steele. What about Paredes as an improvement from a stance of defensive WAR? Ryan.
So Paredes is currently a negative 0.1 defensive WAR, but has been averaging around 2 defensively over the last couple of years. He also is providing an offensive WAR, which for Fangraphs includes batting plus base running as their metrics for offensive WAR. He has an offensive WAR of 14.2, where Christopher Morel has a offensive WAR of negative 5.4 this year. So I'd say he's a pretty large upgrade, considering, has maybe a couple less home runs than Christopher does this year, but with a higher batting average, more than twice the doubles, but doesn't strike out as much, about 40 strikeouts last
and
night.
I mean, third base is a tough position. It's the longest throw you're going to make to first base. You're going to make a fair share of errors there. He actually has, just based on the raw numbers, I know fielding percentage and errors isn't the best way to really judge a player these days in the age of advanced, fielding metrics and everything. But only 6 errors so far this year at third base. Has only had as many as 11 in previous years. That was last season. As far as defensive WAR goes, he's only ever been a negative WAR player in one season. So, he's probably rounds out to about a net 0 defensively. But from what you've been getting from Morel this season so far, that's an upgrade, because Morel has been a butcher at third base, both, throwing, fielding, everything. The only thing you can say is he does have really good reaction time on snaring line drives, but that's about it. On ground balls hit to him, I kind of hold my breath every time one was hit to Christopher Morel when he was a Cub.
Yeah, so I know that what really blew my mind too, when I was looking up at some of the metrics too with Morel and Paredes, was what really stuck out to me that was really surprising. And I don't know if you saw this, but Morel only had 7 doubles this season. Wow. Which really shocked me, for the amount of power that he has. It's really a home run or nothing with Morel, because he had 7 doubles to Paredes has 19. So
even that, you would think that some of the balls that he hits fairly far that may get out of some parks and not out of others, would hit off the wall and be a double. But wow, that's surprising. He's actually never really been a big doubles hitter over his career, as I see now, because he had more homers than doubles last season, and then 19 in his rookie year compared to 16 home runs. So that is odd.
And I know Ryan here is saying that it was a good time to sell high in Morel. I'll say that they didn't sell high in Morel. This was their highest I think that they could have sold on Morel was before the season and the off season. I think the Rays were interested in Morel back then. I think when there were some talks about Tyler Glass now, potentially moving to the Cubs, they wanted Morel to be the centerpiece. And I don't know if the Cubs at that time, were ready to include him, or they were, just didn't like the package that they had to give up at the time beyond Morel. So I don't know any of that, but I do know that Tampa Bay has always kind of been interested in Christopher Morel and, some of the power potential there. But that was the highest point that they could have sold him, and they waited to this point. So I think that from a value standpoint, they got fair, they got a fair trade. And I think this trade makes sense for both clubs, but I don't think that they sold him at his highest peak either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, and then finally the last trade that happened, the last trade that happened was, what's his name? Mark Leiter. They were, Mark Leiter was, what do you call it? He was traded for a couple prospects.
Yes.
Who did they? It was.
Let me pull this up here. It was Benjamin Cowles, shortstop in the Yankee system. He was the number 29 prospect, and then pitcher Jack Neely, relief pitcher who was in AAA Columbus for them, was the number 22 prospect. From what I can see, he had started this year in AA, got promoted to AAA. If all goes well, probably see him at some point in September, and that's the piece I'd probably be more encouraged by to think of as a future closer for next season, because he does have some closing experience as far as I can see right now. Had 6 saves in AA earlier this year, throws hard, 97 miles an hour, 97 miles an hour fastball. Apparently has a really good slider too. So we'll see how it goes with him. Cowley out for the season. Jeez, that's
What I think is interesting in Neely is when I was looking at it today, I think he rated out very similarly to Biggie, who they just gave up, in the Morel trade. So I'm wondering if that felt like kind of a wash, where you're losing high potential arm and Biggie. They knew that this was going to be somebody that could potentially replace that arm, and to your point, maybe have future closer stuff. So that is definitely an interesting part of that trade that I'll be looking forward to seeing, and who knows what that that'll turn into. But I do know that both him and Cowley were both top 30 prospects in the Yankees organization right now too. So beefing up that farm a little bit more. Sure. Again, not a lot of top guys, sitting at the top of that farm system, but they are making it a little bit more, full, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, for Mark Leiter Jr., did a pretty good job last year. What he did in the effort of kind of becoming like the guy to get lefties out by default, I'll appreciate him for that, because this team never made the effort to go out and get an actual left-handed reliever. Was very good again in reverse splits. Had his shaky moments this season, but was always kind of a guy that was there when you needed him. And I'd say that could go on to be a useful piece for the Yankees. And as far as what the Cubs have now, hopefully, a future useful reliever in Jack Neely, and feels like they have that with what his throwing repertoire would be.
Yeah. So we obviously talked about the moves that were made. Any moves that weren't made that you were surprised by? I know you said you might have expected a little bit more action.
Absolutely. Before yesterday, I thought it was a lock that Jameson Taillon would be on the move. And then the Cubs went out and
Yeah.
had him start and did not do very well in that start. I don't really know that that start in particular really turned him off to other teams. Maybe just more so, what the fact that like if another team were to trade for him, that they would have to wait, 5 or so days for them to really bear any fruits of that trade or anything like that. But as it stands, he's still under control for 2 more years. I do feel like they did miss the boat a little bit in that I don't know that they're ever going to get this season that they're getting out of James and Tyon for the rest of this contract should they choose to keep him.
I don't know. I mean, yeah, I mean this the Jamison Tyon that they're seeing right now. He's definitely on a heater right now, and I think, but it was starting to translate at the end of last year in the second half where you started seeing that shift. And I think if you look at the starts between the second half of the year and this year, they've been pretty consistent. And this is, I think, who they thought they were getting when they signed. A high strike guy that pounds his zone. Not going to walk a lot of guys. Get ahead of counts early, and I think he's done that. I was, I guess, I was maybe a little surprised that they didn't trade him, but I think the other side of that is that he has a partial no trade. That he had a list of 10 teams that he would
Right.
go to, and I think that makes it a little bit more challenging. Obviously, when you're going to move a guy like that. I know, like I said, Nico was brought up. I wasn't necessarily surprised that they did not trade him. I think that was kind of a long shot. I think they needed to be wowed by a deal, and I don't know at this point of the season who's trading for a low power second baseman. So,
Especially in what is a down year for Nico too.
right. And I think that they would be really selling low if that was the case too. In this year. I think Tyon was probably the one candidate I thought that was probably going to go. I think even Cody Bellinger was a long shot coming back from injury. He's not really having a season full of power. I thought Neris might have been a guy that could have been traded that didn't get traded, but also not surprised that they kept on.
Right. Yeah, Neris, a guy that I saw someone mention this earlier today on Twitter that with Neris's current contract with the Cubs, if he were to hit 20 more appearances this season, there's a team option in his contract for next year that if he gets those 20 appearances would turn into a player option. And I feel like that maybe is something that turned teams off from trading for him because, for whatever we think about how he's done as closer for the Cubs this season, he does have a pretty good track record of being a solid late inning reliever, and that's how he would likely be used for the rest of the season on whatever team you trade him to. And, you want to use that guy as much as possible. So maybe just the fact that like you had that, and like if he continued to be as inconsistent as he was with the Cubs so far this season, that it was a feeling that team would be stuck with them. So, it's kind of a double-edged sword in that situation. At least the Cubs can kind of control that situation now. Going forward, they're, like we say, the season is more than likely over. So we're probably not going to see as much of Neris here as he would be used on another team had the Cubs traded him. Mm-hmm. So, it's a situation the Cubs can at least control, and if they choose to bring him back for next year thinking that he can bounce back, they can, and if not, then they can move on and plug someone else in as their closer next season. But it's one that I expected to happen before I saw that today, that he has that in his contract. So that maybe could have been the X factor in it all.
Yeah. So looking at just looking at the Cubs trade moves, who would you say your winners and losers of this trade deadline for the Cubs is? Not all of MLB, because I know we got a couple, but just thinking in terms of the Cubs, like any winners or losers that you would point out.
I kind of feel like the winner, the biggest winner of them all will more than likely be Nate Pearson. Um,
Okay.
not so much that like I think he's going to be the best player that they acquired, but I
Mhm.
think he will have a much longer leash here going forward than he probably would have otherwise had he stayed in Toronto, or
Yeah.
if he had gotten traded to an actual contender. He'll be given every opportunity to prove that he was worthy of being a first round pick. It strikes me as a similar mindset to what the Cubs had when they made the Jake Arrieta trade with Baltimore. That you
Mhm.
have this guy who's a former, highly touted prospect that hasn't exactly figured it out in the majors. I don't really know if there's any situation of like pitching coaches in Toronto telling him not to throw certain pitches like Jake Arrieta did in Baltimore. But, and again, I'm not saying that those results are going to play out the same, that Nate Pearson is a future Cy Young winner, but a guy that has been given new life with a fresh new pitching coach that is gone to has been able to find that sort of potential in pitchers that other teams have casted aside. So I'd say the winner of among Cubs involved trades, I would say Nate Pearson is one.
Okay. I like that. I mean, yeah, like I said, former first rounder, one of, I guess, more highly touted prospects like in their farm system that didn't pan out. So I think definitely a chance for a change of scenery kind of, move for him. So I think that's a pretty good call. I would say Mark Leiter Jr. is probably
Okay.
one of the winners in this trade. And I'll say this, I think like, his usage had been really high last year. I think this year it would have continued just considering that, there's not a lot of lefties in the Cubs bullpen. Obviously there's Drew Smiley, but with Luke Little going down, I was a little surprised that they were ready to cut bait with Mark Leiter, considering, like you said, he's got a couple of years of ARB left. And so I would say like him going to a contender, probably feels pretty good for him, and I think they'll probably be able to use him
Right.
in different ways than the Cubs did and maybe not overuse him as much. So, because I do think that they probably have like a little bit of a stronger bullpen. I don't know if it's great, but it's not like uh, not hard to be better than the Cubs bullpen has been this year outside of,
For sure.
the last month,
And,
but
and at least where he's going now, there he can actually be used in maybe a little bit more relaxed role instead of being like the designated like go in there and get lefties out guy, because there are
yeah.
some pretty solid lefties in the Yankees bullpen, and Caleb Ferguson, Tim Hill, Victor Gonzalez. So well, yeah, that's a good situation for him to be going to. I agree with that. As far as losers go, I it's hard to really say because like I guess it would be maybe I would say like the prospects they traded off to the Blue Jays. And that was what Josh Rivera and Yohendrick Pinango.
Hmm.
I only say those guys just because the Blue Jays farm system is not exactly on the same level that the Cubs farm system is. They, you know what I like it. I'm not saying that it may be good for them from a like lifestyle point of view, because they may get called up to the big leagues, sooner than they may have expected to when they were Cubs. Uh, they will probably have a lot more pressure on them to perform, and that may be, asking too much to guys that, were not really all that highly touted of prospects in the Cubs farm system, which, as far as we know, is kind of regarded as one of the best in baseball at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I get that, and I think like they might not have as much pressure. I don't know if that Toronto's fans are looking at the return and being like, "Wow, we fleeced the Cubs for this guy." I think both of those guys were questionable 40-man
That's true.
additions that you know could have been subject to Rule 5 in the offseason. So I don't know if that necessarily they maybe they have more of a shot now, but because like you said to your point, Toronto's farm wasn't as good. I would say my loser would be Christopher Morel, man. I think like the type of player that he is, again, like, in a lot of ways, we regarded him similar to Javi Baez in the way he played the game. I think the guy feeds off energy, he provides energy. And I think going to play a Tropicana in that field, in that crowd, is going to feel very different than playing, day games or night games at Wrigley Field, right? So I think like that is going to be interesting to see as well too, where you got a player like that really feeds off the energy of the crowd and fans, and it's gonna feel different. And Tropicana, by all counts, is one of the worst, if not worst, ballpark in baseball.
Oh, it's between that or Oakland, but then again, Oakland's going bye-bye after the season. So yeah, that's a good point with Morel. And this, this may be his last chance to really prove himself as a big leaguer. But, as I said earlier, that, the Rays do find a way to find some usefulness out of, these young players that may have failed in other situations. The one other thing I will say with Morel is that, playing in the AL East and going on the roads to those type of environments in particular, like every last one of those teams is just ready to hate you the second you walk in with the opposing jersey on. So,
that's a good point.
Good call on Morel being, potentially a loser in this situation.
Okay, so Jed said it. When they made moves, they were looking to make moves with the intention of beyond just this year. I think them not trading Jameson Taillon, who's got 2 years left on his contract, adding some pieces versus completely selling off. Did you feel like this was intentionally done because they truly feel like maybe this year was a lost year, but 2025 is an actual window for winning?
Well, I want to say they do feel confident that they will compete in 2025. I felt like if they really felt like that was the window and not this season, like they still wanted to try and see if they could squeeze everything out of this season, that you would have seen Jameson Taillon or maybe not Taillon, but Nico Hoerner go when, you have guys kind of on the doorstep that could replace those guys, in the form of Cade Horton, in the form of, James Triantos or, Matt Shaw if he moves over to second base. But, that's I do feel like, 2025 is the year that, like, the thing you can say about Jed, no matter what your view of him is that he has done a really good job of building up the farm system. And I don't really feel that his job is all that much in jeopardy until we see what those guys are like. And if they happen to fail, then he'd kind of really be on the hot seat. So, if 2025, 2024 has been a failed year so far, will more than likely continue to be a failed year. 2025 feels like, as of right now, what would be the window in the eyes of the Cubs front office.
Yeah, I'm also going to petition for 2025 to move the Cubs to the American League, because apparently that is the only teams that the Cubs can beat this year. They are now 17-9 in the American League, and they continue to win series against American League teams that actually are pretty good. So
right, Royals, Orioles, freaking
the
Red
Sox, I think, right?
No, Red Sox. They only took 1 out of 3 in one of those games. They got beat really badly.
Yeah. So, God, I'm going to petition for that, because I mean they need to get out of the NL Central, because they can't win any of these games. They're already down 5-0 in this game to the Reds after being whooped 7-1 yesterday. So, all right. Well, let's move on to player A, player B. I know you cooked up a couple things for me, so I'm going to post them. I'll just let you read them off, and we'll go through our blind resumes.
Sure. So only one for this week's episode. We normally do 2, but in a little bit of a time crunch tonight, only decided to stick with 1. Got a pair of pitchers here. This is both what they've done this season. So We have player A, who in 18 starts so far this season has pitched 104 and 2/3 innings, has a record of 7-6, a 3.35 ERA, a WHIP of 1.166, 82 strikeouts to 22 walks allowed, 100 hits allowed, 14 home runs allowed, 25 extra base hits allowed, and a baseball reference WAR of 1.6 for player A. And then we have player B, who in 19 starts this season has pitched 114 innings, has a record of 8-6, a 3.47 ERA, a WHIP of 0.956, 147 strikeouts, 33 walks allowed, 76 hits allowed, 13 home runs allowed, 36 extra base hits allowed, and a baseball reference WAR of 1.9. So between these two, who are we starting? Who are we sitting?
Oh man, this is tough. You know me, man. I'm a strikeout guy. I love the strikeout. So I'm gonna go player B just because of the strikeouts. And I think like obviously the whip is lower, so I know more walks, but they've also pitched more innings. So I mean that plays a factor in how many extra walks they have. Less hits, less home runs, and more innings. Obviously more extra base hits, but if they're not putting a lot of guys on base, probably not doing a ton of damage with those. So yeah, I'm gonna go player B.
Okay.
Start player B.
Player B is a guy that we mentioned earlier when discussing Chris Morel trade talks in this past offseason. That would be Tyler Glasnow of the Tampa Bay Rays. Yeah. Player A is still a Cub, Jameson Taillon. And I went with these two guys just in thinking that, obviously you prefer Tyler Glasnow to Jameson Taillon, and I think most baseball fans would, but just seeing their stats there, they're fairly comparable to each other. So, everyone's saying that they could have had Tyler Glasnow in the offseason. You basically got Tyler Glasnow's production from Jameson Taillon.
Yeah, and less money too.
And way less money, and probably way less of an injury risk than Tyler Glasnow.
Yeah. Well, yeah, Taillon already went through Tommy John twice, so.
Right. Yeah.
All right. Great. Well, I know you also have another one lined up for me. You've got On This Day in Cubs History. So
for sure.
I don't have anything in front of me, but
I got you.
I'll let you shoot from the hip.
So just like last week, we're going to go on tomorrow's date in Cubs history. And we're going back to our favorite season ever of 2016. That day in particular, the Cubs happened to be on Sunday Night Baseball in a pretty iconic game against the Seattle Mariners, one that went 13 innings. I happened to be on a rooftop for this game, and it ended on an RBI bunt single by John Lester in extra innings when he came up to pinch hit. Mm-hmm. Two questions for you from that game.
Okay.
I think one answer is more easier than the other.
Okay.
Who was the starting pitcher for the Cubs in that game?
Oh, man. Who was the pitcher in that game? Because if Lester was pinch running or pinch hitting, definitely it couldn't have been him. I'm trying to think of the rotation that year was Jake Arrieta, John Lackey, Jason Hamill, and Kyle Hendricks. It was a 2-1 game. Was it Kyle Hendricks?
It was not Kyle Hendricks. It was actually a little bit more high scoring than you think. Final score of that game wound up being 7-6.
That's right. I always think it was like 2-1, but okay.
No, it was a 6-3 game going to the bottom of the ninth, and the Cubs wound up tying it. I believe how they tied it was like on a wild pitch, too. Then went to extras, and Cubs wound up getting the walk-off.
Ooh. So that game, starting pitcher. So it wasn't Hendricks, it wasn't Lester. I don't know. I'm lost.
So this is probably a pretty tough one.
Okay.
It was a guy that they kind of just picked up off the scrap heap for this game in particular. Former
Okay.
Orioles reliever Brian Mattis started this game, only went 3
Oh,
innings, and
God.
allowed 6 runs.
Yeah, no way I would have
kind of-
gotten that.
Kind of in an emergency start for them, because I think
Okay.
at that time maybe either Arrieta or Lackey had went on the injured list at that time.
Okay.
But my
Definitely wouldn't have
second
gotten
question for you, and
Okay.
I think you might be able to get this one, is when John Lester laid out that bunt and beat out the single to win the game, who scored the game-winning run for the Cubs in that game?
I want to say that was Jason Hayward.
It was Jason Hayward.
Okay.
Probably his biggest moment on offense from that season.
Probably so. I know. And then who is the person that I remember that celebration too, because that was one of the funniest walk-off wins ever that I've seen, because somebody had a thing of talcum powder and just puffed it right into John Lester's face. They ripped off his jersey, they squeezed that bottle, and it was just so much talcum. I can't remember who did that. Do you remember who did that?
I don't, because I was kind of on a rooftop that was a little off to the side from everyone else, but that feels like the type of thing that Pedro Strop would have done at that time.
Yeah, I was thinking because he kind of went all out. Travis Wood too, I feel would have been another guy.
Well, Travis Wood did get some action in that game, both as a pitcher and in left field, and actually made a pretty nice catch in left field, right up in the ivy in that game.
That's right.
Yep.
All right. So winding down here, I know you gotta jump off too. You've got another show to do right after this. So let's jump into our Find the W's, Taking the L's.
Hello. You play to win the game.
Addison is next. Doors open on the left at Addison.
I say one thing. Go. Let's go. That's a W. That's E1. That's E1. That's a W.
Is a L7 winning.
That's the worst thing, man. Gets me every time.
Yep.
All right. So I know we will go through our W's and our L's for the week. I've got one W and I've got 2 L's. So I'll go through the W. I know we just talked about it right before the show. The news broke. I'm gonna give my W to Ryan Poles, man. Let that man cook. Let that man. And he re-signed DJ Moore to an extension, 4 years, $110 million, $86 million guaranteed, roughly $27.5 million a year before guaranteed money. This is the beauty of having a rookie quarterback, right? Where you can sign some of these guys. It lines perfectly. DJ Moore, I want to say, is about 27 years old. 4 more years gets you to about 31 when, wide receivers start to trail off a little bit. That's also around the time that you're probably going to owe Caleb Williams money if he's as good as you hope he is. So absolutely love this move.
Sure.
Huge win for Ryan Poles. I think the last thing he needs to do is add a defensive end. Other than that, this has been probably the best offseason I have seen the Bears have in my lifetime. So
wow. That's high praise.
It's also, let's put it into context. It's the Bears. How many?
That's true. That's true.
Have, right. And I know you. Yeah. I know you don't win in the off season, but by all accounts, this was a really exciting one. So
for sure. And I do like the 4 years kind of, it lines up kind of perfectly with when, Caleb Williams would be getting his 5th-year option should the Bears choose to go that route. And, hopefully even before then, there will be, talks of an extension that'll take him beyond that. So, an outstanding move, glad to see DJ Moore locked up for, for all of Caleb Williams' development. And as our guy Ryan says right here, that trade will go down as the biggest fleece. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. They got the Panthers good on that one, thinking that they really needed to get Bryce Young, and Bryce Young has not turned out to be good for them at all. Probably not even the best quarterback in that draft.
Probably won't be, and I think even if he turns out to be decent, I think it's still a fleece with the amount that they got from him, because you have to remember they also were able to draft Tyreek Stevenson in the second round with one of those picks, and they still have a second rounder next year from Carolina. So,
Wow.
yeah, absolute monster of a trade. Let that man cook, man. Let that bad man Ryan Poles cook.
Let Poles cook. Absolutely.
All right. Who you got for your W?
I got 2 W's. I could not think of an L, but I'll go with 2 that are fairly personal to me. And one happened this past Saturday at Wrigley. Cubs were out of town. You're thinking, what are you doing at Wrigley, Praz? What are you doing just touring this whole place? Well, it was Cubs season ticket holder family day, and my good buddy Peter, known for many years, was nice enough to invite me to come with him. As you can see, got a picture next to the 400 in the Ivy. That's now my current Twitter and Facebook picture. Probably won't be changing anytime soon. This right here was the, like, kind of the pathway between the visiting clubhouse and the dugout. And, like, it's known for being, like, very far from each other in that instance. It was, we were all commenting on, like, how far it was, but you see a lot of people out here playing catch. Then you got the hallway to the Cubs clubhouse, which if you haven't had a good look at that yet, it's pretty awesome. Unfortunately, they would not allow us to take any pictures when we were there. And then me and the manager media room doing my best impression of Craig Counsell talking down to Jesse Rogers from earlier this week. So, you know, had a good time, and a huge thank you to my good buddy Peter for allowing me to come with him for that.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, showing more fire than Craig Counsell has all year. So I appreciate that.
For sure. You mind if I go with my other W on this one too?
Yeah. Go
Okay.
for it.
So my other W, someone who's been in my corner for a long time, and someone, you know, similar to your situation. You know, we both grew up on the South Side as Cubs fans, kind of in the minority in our own neighborhoods. And but in the case of my family, it is the vast majority of it is all Cub fans. But there is one guy who is a little bit of a stickler that is a Sox fan, and it would be my Uncle Paul, who you see pictured with me here at Wrigley in 2003. That was Game 3 against the Braves. They won prior versus Maddox. My Uncle Paul turned 55 today, so a very happy birthday to him.
Hey, happy birthday.
Has always been in my corner, my godfather. He, you know, has given me high praise, has been there for me in every, you know, difficult aspect of my life. So a huge thank you, happy birthday, and a huge W to my Uncle Paul. And also, like, you know, similar to how you described your uncle who recently passed away that was a Sox fan, that, you know, despite being a Sox fan, was, you know, always very nice and complimentary towards the Cubs when it would be called for. Little trash talk here and there, but, you know, would always be cool with me.
Love that. That's awesome. Well, happy birthday to your uncle. That's amazing. All right, so my L's, really quickly. I got one L, you know, and again, it's like I don't mean to do this to Sox fans intentionally. That's not my intention here, but Chris Getz has got to be one of the dumbest GMs in baseball for not getting anything for Garrett Crochet. This is probably one of the biggest names on the block, right? Like during this deadline. You know, this is somebody who was a starter, you know, failed starter, turn reliever, back to a successful starter, has, you know, career numbers, you know, in innings pitch right now for a starter. You don't know what injury is going to look like for this guy. You know, they're not going to sign him to a long-term deal. I feel very confident in saying that. So if that's the case, like, why are you not getting anything for this guy at all, right? And there was a market. I mean, there were guys, there was Boston, there was New York, there was LA, there was Houston. I mean, there were a lot of teams looking for a top-end starter this year, and that's the guy that did not get traded. That was probably one of the biggest names, if not the biggest trade, you know, on the market this deadline, and no movement there. Not even any rumblings that something was close. So Chris Getz, buffoon. You get an L. And then lastly, I know we talked about this too. I want to give an L to first baseman, our first base umpire, James Hoy, from yesterday's Cubs-Reds game. I'm going to paint a picture here. So Nate Pearson makes his Cubs debut. He comes in, he gives up, he has a 1-2-3 inning, in the first inning that he pitches, gets an out, next batter, and then he gives up a home run to Candelario, an ex, Cubs farmhand and MLB player. Right. Candelario hits a home run. The pitch immediately after that home run is given. Nate Pearson hits, who was it in that lineup? It was Stevenson, wasn't it? Tyler Stevenson?
Tyler Stevenson, yep.
He gets beamed in. He gets beams in the head with a 96-mile-per-hour fastball. Stevenson stops, says something to Peterson. You see Amaya hold him back and say, "Hey, look, not intentional." You can and you look at the replay. It was a two-seamer where it just the release flew open. The ball got away from him, and I get it. Stevenson didn't say anything like it was, "Hey, right. I know that was intentional." It's more so, that's the fucking head. You have to be better than that. And that's what essentially what he's saying to Pearson. Pearson didn't react, said, "Oh yeah, like, dude, like, my bad, like, not intentional."
For sure.
Stevenson takes his base. The umps call in, discuss, and then they warn both benches and throw out Pearson, which, at that point in the game, it is 7-0, right? It was 7-0 at that point in the game. Pearson's getting his first work with the Cubs in. Again, you can clearly see that the ball, was released at a point where it just flew open, got out of control. Don't think it was intentional. And I get it happened right after a home run. So if you are just listening into a game, that's what it would sound like. But if you're watching the game, you could tell that's not what was happening. So Pearson gets thrown out. Craig Counsell finally comes in, defends his player, says, "You have to be fucking better than that." Says, "You don't know what you're doing. Have a feel for the game. You don't have a feel for the game," and then gets tossed out. Rubbish call, absolute trash. Good on Counsell, because he was 100% right in saying, like, "Hey, you should have a better feel for that game. You should have a better feel for that situation, when you're making that call." And you're basically expending a ball player, ejecting him right after one out, right? And having to use another reliever in a blowout game.
Yeah, exactly. In a game where your bullpen has already been stressed enough, and now you're forced to bring in a guy who hasn't even warmed up yet. So
yeah, absolute trash. So James Hoy gets my other out. So trash.
And the thing is too, I don't know how often umpires really pay attention to, what the news around baseball is, but they know what time of year it is. They know it's the trade deadline. I would like to think they know that, this is Nate Pearson's first game as a Cub. He doesn't really have any bad blood with any of the Reds players.
No, not at all. Has no blood.
Exactly. Yeah, this may very well be the first time he's ever facing the Reds. So, clearly not intentional. Clearly a ball that just got away from him. And, have some feel. And, they had their moment. They settled it there. No one was upset after that. Everyone, took their base. He went back to take the mound. We're all good. And then the umpires just kind of had to instigate it all and made it into something bigger than it really was. So good call on the L for James Hoy there.
All right. Well, we're wrapping up here. We've, I know you got to jump off here. We got our weekly predictions here. Just an FYI to, anyone's listening, we're not going to be back next week. I will be in Kentucky for a couple days, so I'll be doing another barrel pick with my local shop, Malloy's Finest Wine and Spirits, over in Glen Ellen, Lisle, and Naperville. Really, really excited.
Very nice.
We're going to have another barrel pick coming out. Probably will be either winter or early spring, if I had to guess, for that release. So I'll be able to share a little bit more once I get back from the trip, but super excited about this pick. And then I'll be doing some more picks in September, the week of our Kentucky Bourbon Fest trip. So But we have 2 more against the Reds. We got tonight, which already looks like it will probably be chalked up as a loss.
Yeah.
You've got another one with the Reds tomorrow. Then you've got 4 with the Cardinals over the weekend, and then 3 with the Twins. Any bold predictions you want to make? I mean, I was with on last week. I said they were going to go 0-6. They ended up taking 2 out of 3 from the Royals and 1 out of 3 from the Brewers. So they split, but
right.
so
You know,
9 games here.
they're at the point where it's kind of a lost season. And for what it's worth, tomorrow, not exactly a favorable pitching matchup for the Cubs. Kyle Hendricks versus Nick Lodolo. Kyle Hendricks, for those who don't know, has about double the ERA that Nick Lodolo has for this season. Actually, it's actually higher than double what Lodolo's ERA is. So I think it's safe to say that one's going to be a loss.
Okay. So 0-2 against the Reds.
Yeah.
Or against the Cards.
Getting swept by the Reds. We have here we go. So Thursday it'll be sunny gray. No starters have been announced for the Cubs for that upcoming series against the Cardinals. But on Friday, be interesting because we'll see former White Sox pitcher Eric Fetty make his Cardinals debut. Yep. You had sunny gray on Thursday. It'll be Kyle Gibson on Saturday. Miles Michaelis on Sunday. I think I'm just going to be safe and say that Cubs will get swept in Cincinnati, sadly, and more than likely only going to take 1 out of 4 against the Cardinals. Whichever game that Shota Imanaga winds up pitching in, I think that'll be the one that they win.
And then 3 games against the Twins.
I didn't even look that far. Where are the Twins at? Because I know they went on a crazy long winning streak earlier this season, but they kind of fell out of the race. And let's see, they are
58-47 this year, so that 11 games above 500.
Not totally out of it yet. 6 behind
in a wild card
Guardians.
spot.
In a wild card spot. Without really knowing what the pitching matchup is going to be, I think I'll just go ahead and say that the Twins are going to take 2 out of 3 from the Cubs.
Okay.
Yeah.
We might as well do it because it's going to be over the weekend as well. I know that you're planning to go to one of the games, but they got 2 against the White Sox over the next weekend too. So the 9th and the 10th.
Hey, but by the way, folks, for those who don't know, we're part of the Chicago Sports Bums. And for the Saturday game of that series, they will be hosting a tailgate, Whiskey at Comiskey in Lot B at Guaranteed Rate Field. I will be there. Let's make that look a little more blue. It's normally all White Sox fans that are there. I feel like the outcast when I show up there. Let's have some Cub fans show out to that. In the case of that series, I think I'll go with a perfect sweep of it because the White Sox, I don't think, are really even trying at this point. And I don't even really feel good about making fun of him at this point because, it's kind of like beating a dead horse. So, yeah. Take 2 from the White Sox, but, 2 total games, one before that between the Twins and the Cardinals series.
Okay. So they got Cardinals winning the National League Central. That would be hilarious. I mean, that would take an epic collapse by Milwaukee.
You know what? It wouldn't be... I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility because we don't know what type of late season manager Pat Murphy is at this point. And Brewers teams previously have kind of been crediting Craig Counsell for, having the success that they did, and he's not there anymore. So
I also don't think the Cardinals are as good as their record suggests. So
probably not, but it's not like they're not still trying. They made some moves. They got Eric Fetty now. They're not fading away anytime soon, I don't think. Probably more likely that they stick as a wild card, but at this point in my life, I've come to hate the Brewers more than I hate the Cardinals. Not necessarily saying I'm rooting for the Cardinals to catch up to them, but I would prefer it if there's only one NL Central team in the playoffs. And honestly, let's close with that. By the way, who would you if you could pick right now who you'd want to see win the NL Central? I think we both have the same answer. It's the Pirates, right?
The Pirates? Yeah, I mean, I lived in Pittsburgh for a while. I actually rooted for them when they were not playing the Cubs. I really enjoy, their fan base is great. Yeah, I'd probably say. I mean, I don't have a problem with Milwaukee. I'm tired of Milwaukee winning it, just
Yes.
because I think like the Cubs obviously should be better. But if I had to choose today who I'd rather see, yeah, it would be Pittsburgh out of anybody. But I mean, it's also because they've been cellar dwellers for a decade.
That's true.
So it's like you don't feel as threatened by a team like that. But
I'm also thinking of this just from the perspective of if they get in, they kind of are a dangerous team with those top three pitchers they have with Skeens, Jones, and Keller. So like,
well, if they get to a wild card spot, they're going to be pretty dangerous and pretty hard to beat. So
exactly.
All right. Well, I know you got to jump off. You got to get onto your next cast. So appreciate you carving out some time, and we were able to make it fit. We'll have a week off and hopefully reconvene, and we'll see what the Cubs record is at that point. I mean, we'll see how far out of a playoff spot we are at that point. But appreciate everybody jumping on, listening, tuning in, commenting along the way. It's trade deadline's over. Made some moves. We'll see what they equate to. Other than that, let's see how many times they can actually fly the W here in the next couple of weeks. Thanks for joining, folks.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
Thank you all for watching.